My daughter's wedding should have ended with a dance, not a slap that left my blood on marble. When my new son-in-law demanded the ranch keys in front of 200 guests, I said no and watched his mask fall. What happened next forced me to make one call that changed everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I never imagined my daughter's wedding day would end with a smear of blood on polished stone, but that's exactly how it went. Nora was radiant in her mother's old lace, and I kept swallowing the ache that rose every time I thought of the woman we'd lost. Caleb drifted through the guests with his bow tie loosened and a champagne shine in his eyes. He stopped beside me just as the band eased into a slow number, set a heavy hand on my shoulder like he was pinning down a deal, and said, loud enough for the bar to hear, "Mr. Michael, let's talk keys and paperwork." I told him this wasn't the time. He smiled, slid a velvet box from his breast pocket and flipped it open. A set of keys caught the light. Copies of mine. "Nora made duplicates," he said. "A symbol of the future. But I want the originals. And the transfer files." Spoons clinked into glasses. The music died. Eyes gathered. I shook my head. He went into a speech about old men clutching work and husbands providing security, and then the ugliness bubbled up through the polish. His hand cracked across my face, the sound sharp as a snapped twig against the glass wall. I staggered, slipped, and went down. Blood pushed a metallic taste into my mouth. Through the stunned circle of guests, Nora stood with her hand over her lips. She didn't run to me. She looked at Caleb, and I knew that look. Someone who's already seen that side of a man. I got up, spine straight the way you do when the wind slams the barn gate. "The reception is over," I said, and I walked out. In the truck, the world narrowed to my breath and the thud in my cheek. I called Eleanor Park. "It's time," I said. After a short, cool silence, she said, "We'll be there in the morning." To explain why a single phone call could turn a life, I have to go back 2 years when this started with harmless-sounding concern. "Dad, you've been missing appointments," Nora said one night, setting her cup down. "Caleb thinks maybe you should hire help. I worry too." I nodded. That concern didn't stay gentle for long. Caleb's version of our conversations began to feature things I'd agreed to but hadn't. Lines I'd said that never left my mouth. I started keeping a notebook. Every conversation, place, and time. I sat with Howard Reed and mapped out the legal boundaries for when a relative tries to help by replacing you. I visited Dr. Helen Brooks and asked for the full slate of tests: physical, memory, cognition. She searched my face for a moment and nodded. "We'll run everything," she said. "So when you say you're fine, the records stand with you." The results were clear as a sky after rain. Blood pressure, good. Memory, solid. Cognitive scores comfortably above average for my age. I tucked the reports into a red plastic folder and locked it away. By day, I still rose before daylight to open the gate, check the herd, and watch the sun slide over the ridge. At night, I sat under the kitchen lamp and looked at the lines I'd written, trying to sketch the shape of a storm. On that map, there was a marker from 25 years ago. Grass burned brown, wells falling, hospital bills stacked cold and tall. A black sedan pulled up, and a man with a leather briefcase set it on my old wooden table and introduced himself as Robert from Arcadia Agricultural Trust. He offered a way to keep the place. AAT would buy the ranch, hire me long-term as manager, pay my salary, cover operating costs. From the outside, nothing would change. The old sign on the gate, the fence talking in the wind, the herd working the same paths. On paper, the land would be theirs. One clause pricked like a pin. Keep the ownership structure quiet. I signed because there were only 2 roads ahead. The bank's chokehold or hope. It drizzled that night. A week later, the rigs rolled in. 6 months later, the herd's backs shone again. I kept the secret for 25 years, planning to tell Nora when she was ready and when it wouldn't tangle her life. Then Caleb showed up, and began measuring everything with a developer's ruler. He leaned on the barn rail with a phone, talking about potential and price points, running numbers where the dirt has a smell. I called Robert. "We may have a problem," I said. He reminded me of the termination clause if the structure ever went public. I understood. The secret I'd kept to protect my family could become the sharpest blade if it fell into the wrong hands. So the morning after the wedding, when 3 black SUVs kicked dust up the lane, I felt a sliver of relief because I wasn't standing alone anymore. Eleanor Park stepped out with the posture of someone who makes hard calls. Behind her came Victor Lang, Daniel Cho, Rosa Martinez, and Tom Briggs. They sat around my kitchen table like a surgical team. No prodding at feelings, just files opened and laptops blinking awake. Daniel outlined the credit abuse, short-term loans, an internal review at Caleb's firm. Rosa sketched the pattern: isolation, undermining, drip-feeding doubt about my competence. Victor read off numbers. Tom asked operations questions in case we needed to tighten security. Eleanor held my eyes. "Are you ready?" she asked. I set the red folder beside the slim recorder Daniel had handed me and nodded. She said, "Let him talk. We'll be outside. We intervene only for safety. And, Michael, don't do this alone anymore." The phone rang when the sun had just climbed the porch. I put it on speaker and slid the recorder closer. Caleb started with the lines men use after they hit you. "We're family. People say things. It got out of hand." He moved quickly to the solution. "Do the right thing today," meaning I sign, he pockets the papers, and nobody loses face. Otherwise, the hard way: doctors, lawyers, a competency hearing, court, me losing my say. "You call that protecting Nora?" I asked. He exhaled a laugh. "Protecting you, too. At your age, one fall, and you might not get up." Across the table, Daniel tapped the recorder's red light. Rosa's pen ticked like a small, steady rain. When the call ended, Eleanor said, "That's enough. Invite him here. He wants official. We'll do official." He arrived right on noon, parked glossy and close to the porch, and checked his tie in the mirror like he was stepping into a sweet signing. He came in without a hello, snapped open his case, and spread papers. Power of attorney, deed transfer, deed. A summary of asset optimization. He showed me renderings on his phone: curving streets, a lake, a golf course, drawn where our pasture breathes. "They're talking 4.8 for the 800 acres, he said, sugar sprinkled on a wound. "I can close in weeks." I asked offhand, "What's your commission, 2%? He froze half a beat, shrugged. "Standard." Then he shifted into the family voice. I was old, alone, one fall from disaster. Nora would inherit a pile of rotted boards if I kept clinging. I let him finish, then said, "How's work?" He played dumb. I mentioned the off-book charges, the controller's name, the date of the personnel meeting. Color drained. His eyes skimmed the windows like he just remembered he might not be alone. The door opened with the soft click of a period landing where it should. Eleanor came in with Daniel, Rosa, Tom, and Victor, and settled around the table with an even, quiet weight. "Arcadia Agricultural Trust has been the legal owner of this property for 25 years, Eleanor said, voice unhurried. "Mr. Michael Cole is our manager. What you've laid out here is a plan to convert someone else's asset to your own." Daniel set a packet on the smooth tabletop: a temporary restraining order, citations on elder assault, statements from last night's witnesses. Tom fired up a pocket projector and played this morning's call. Caleb's threats echoed in a kitchen, more used to the sound of spoons against mugs. Rosa added a few clean lines about debts and dangerous links. No one raised a voice. No one had to. Caleb finally understood he wasn't in a flexible deal. He was in a room full of people with the authority to shut every door he'd been trying to open. "We're asking you to leave now," Eleanor said, "and not to contact Mr. Cole or Nora. You have a short window to pack. Our security team will monitor." "Nora's my wife," he said. Rosa glanced at her screen. Your marital status may not be fully resolved from your prior situation. That part belongs to the authorities. He scooped his papers with jittery hands, jammed them back into the case, and looked around for another exit. On the porch, two big men in plain clothes stood like pillars. No words, just presence. And the loudest man in my life went quiet. The harder part came next. Nora was at a hotel. We took a quiet conference room and drew the blinds. She came in wearing yesterday's dress, creased and tired, eyes red. "What are you doing, Dad?" she asked, scanning the faces with me. I told her there were things she needed to hear now. Eleanor laid out the ownership structure. Daniel pulled up files. Tom and Victor lived inside their numbers. And I spoke the sentence I'd ducked for 25 years. "I don't own the land. I manage it for them." No one spoke for a stretch. Nora stared at the table like she was trying to replay years in her head. "What about all the times you said, 'Later this would be mine'?" The question hung midair. Eleanor answered. If she wanted it and could make it work, AAT had always been open to a sale, but the right to transfer had never been mine. Daniel went through the debts, the internal probe, the lies, and the possibility the marriage wasn't legal at all. Nora folded over as if someone had driven a fist into her middle. I reached for her. She brushed my hand away. "Don't." My hand fell back. The room held a silence that felt like empty space between two people who love each other. Finally, she lifted her head. "How long have you known?" I told her about the notebook, Howard Reed, Dr. Brooks, and the red folder in the safe. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to steal your happiness with an old man's suspicion," I said slowly, "and because you might not have believed me." She studied me for a long time and let out a slow breath. "I looked up nursing homes," she said. "I started the paperwork for a competency evaluation." That cut deeper than the slap. No blood this time, only a gap you can't see. "I need time," Nora said at last. 3 months unspooled into steady work. Nora came back to the ranch not to hide, but to do. She learned to splice fence wire, to vaccinate calves, to count and cost out hay. At night, she sat at the kitchen table with a laptop, color-coding expenses and revenues into a dashboard that made my ledger look like a pile of leaves. AAT's quarterly visits ran longer. Rosa praised her dashboards. Eleanor watched her bargain with a cattle buyer and let herself smile. News of Caleb surfaced like a bubble and burst. Rumors of the southern border, then nothing. I felt a kind of quiet relief you can't shout. One afternoon, Nora stood at the porch edge looking over the pasture and said very softly, "I want to buy it." I asked one question. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Not out of duty, because this is home." The work began the way all serious work does. Appraisal, operational audit, financing, a repayment schedule. Victor walked us through cash flow models. Tom inspected every well, fence line, and ranch road. Daniel tuned the contracts to protect AAT while opening the gate for a real owner. I watched Nora at the center of them and saw that she wasn't the bride with swollen eyes in a hotel room anymore. She was an adult writing the next chapter with a steady hand. On closing day, Eleanor brought a bottle of wine. She raised her glass and told a simple story. 25 years ago, they kept the place from being broken apart. Today, they were handing it back to the right hands. Nora smiled the way she hadn't since the wedding. I signed where a manager signs. Still a manager, but now answerable to my daughter. Back home, I mounted a new steel key box on the porch post, a 4-digit code and a smooth sliding lid. I handed Nora the key ring. She keyed the code, set the originals inside, and slid the lid shut with a small, satisfying click. "The originals live here," I said. "Copies by your rules." She grinned. "Rule 1, no more secrets." That night, we walked the north fence to see what the storm had left. The wind carried damp earth and crushed grass. Cowbells tinked somewhere beyond the mesquites. Nora asked if I regretted keeping the secret so long. I thought about it. "I regret that it left you exposed," I said. "But without AAT back then, There might not be a fence for us to walk tonight. She nodded and, out of nowhere, brought up her mother. If Mom were here, she'd say home isn't in the deed, it's in the people who look after one another. The line landed like her voice in the last light. On the porch, the lamp warmed the boards like fresh bread. I poured 2 glasses of water. People ask what revenge is, I said. I think it's living right, and longer than the one who tried to knock you down. Nora leaned against the door frame and smiled. And telling the truth as early as you can. I nodded. That too, and locking the key box. I slept that night without a dream for the first time in months. No more midnight jolts from the phone. No more scanning the road for a stranger's car by the fence. In the morning, I was up before Nora, coffee on, the barn clucking with its usual noises. A calf fussed like a child. I stepped out into the wet stripe of grass as Nora came down the steps and stood beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We stood there a long time, a quiet promise that what we'd keep from now on wasn't just land, but the way we face each other in clean light. I used to think villains have to exit with noise, but they don't. Caleb left our lives with the soft certainty of a door that stays shut. No fireworks, no cheer. Just the return of ordinary breathing, the click of a key box lid sliding into place, the sound of wind passing over a boundary drawn where it belongs. And I understood that what I'd reclaimed wasn't only decisions about pasture and cattle, but the right to speak plainly, to trust, and to be at rest in my own house. If someone asks about the 25-year secret, I'll say it was a deal to keep the land and a lesson for keeping people. A lesson written in sweat, in one slap in front of 200 witnesses, and in 4 digits only a father and daughter know.